And now we return to the unexplained. Many UFO sightings are easily explained. Yet when more than one person claims to see the same object at the same time, from different vantage points, the reports become harder to dismiss. Hudson County, New Jersey, the town of North Bergen, a middle-class suburb across the river from New York City. Its residents are hard-working, educated professionals who tend to be realists. This is also a place where there have been persistent claims of alien and UFO sightings. George Obarski owned a Manhattan liquor store and drove the same route back to his home in North Bergen, New Jersey, every night for decades. At 3 a.m. on the morning of January 12, 1975, as he was driving through the local park, his radio reception suddenly became distorted. He related the subsequent events to UFO investigator Bud Hopkins, who recorded his story with a portable tape recorder.
Well, I would say that that thing was 30 feet across.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big thing.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be, I would say, maybe 6 feet high.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like a pancake. Yeah. It was blown up and like a pancake.
Right.
And the thing landed right ahead of me.
He described small figures who got out. He said they looked like kids in snowsuits, and they were each one carrying a kind of a squarish receptacle and a long spoon-like shovel. They dug soil samples extremely quickly, spooning up the dirt, put it in the little satchels, and got back in the craft. He said they moved incredibly fast, like kids coming down a fire escape. And the thing took off. He was absolutely terrified, stunned. He didn't know what he was seeing.
Even after George Obarski made it home, he was still shaken, terrorized by what he had encountered.
I was scared to death.
Yeah.
You know, I was sweating, and I immediately made some tea. Boy, after that, I turned on this radio, and I took 2 aspirins. Hey, you know, I was scared.
Right.
Oh, man, if this is either I'm going crazy, there's something awful wrong with me.
George Obarski died in 1990. His son, Frank, remembers his father's story well.
What he described was a big saucer-like object, which, for want of any better explanation, you'd have to call a UFO, unidentified flying object, that came down, was sort of disc-like on the bottom, had very strange lighting, sort of glowed. The clincher was, after it landed, my father described himself as being basically frozen, almost in fear. And this is a guy who'd been robbed a lot in the liquor store in New York and knew what fear was like and had coped with it a lot. But he said he was genuinely frightened of this thing.
Bud Hopkins tried to corroborate George Obarski's story with other witnesses, including a doorman who worked at the Stonehenge apartment building across the street from the park.
I realized it was a big apartment building there. So I spent weeks trying to locate the doorman. I called him, and I remember my adrenaline rushing when this man said, "I will never forget it. This flying saucer came down and landed in the park." And I watched the thing come down. Then he started describing what it looked like, and it was an identical description to George.
After writing about Obarski's story in the Village Voice newspaper, Bud Hopkins kept looking for other possible witnesses.
One family came to light afterwards. They were living about 5 blocks away, seeing this object coming down the street, maybe 40 feet up, slanted. And they described it as if it was looking in their windows. And even though the woman in the family was ill, she ran outside in her nightgown, bare feet, and the father and the children ran out, and they followed this thing down the street.
A North Bergen school teacher, Ann Karlovich, says she listened skeptically as her daughters described the telltale evidence in the park on the day after the alleged incident.
Back in 1975, we had heard about this incident that there was a flying saucer in the park. So my daughter and her friends went down to the park to see what was going on, and they all came running back saying they saw rings and burn marks in the grass in the field down near the softball field. And they told me the whole story about broken windows, that the Stonehenge had a large glass facade and it was broken by a beam of light that hit it. The kids were awfully excited about it.
Frank Obarski also went to the site with his father. He knew him as a practical man, so it was difficult for him to understand why his dad held to such a seemingly irrational story.
He didn't show much interest in things that couldn't be proved or disproved or that didn't apply to everyday life. And this was one of those categories that he felt didn't apply to everyday life. So I had a lot of trouble reconciling my knowledge of my father with this story he was telling me.
He said, you know, I've lived a long life as honorably and truthfully as I was able to. And he said, a man doesn't do that for over 70 years and then throw it all away by making up some foolishness.
The North Bergen area had a history of UFO claims prior to Obarski's alleged alien sighting, and the reports are still coming in. When we return, a Wall Street investor, an artist, an architect, and others from North Bergen, New Jersey, tell their stories. Since the alleged sighting made famous by George Obarski in 1975, residents of North Bergen, New Jersey have reported seeing dozens of UFOs on a number of different occasions. In the early evening of July 6, 1986, Wall Street investor Ron Lee and artist Nanetta Nappi were enjoying the sunset on Hurd Terrace in the Stonehenge apartment complex.
I just said, what the heck is that out in the sky? I was just staring out and I saw something that was unidentifiable to me. And Nanetta and I looked at it and it wasn't moving. It didn't have any sound. And we just followed it with our eyes and tried to guess what that could be.
Had it had a motor sound to it, I would not have been suspicious, but the fact that it was so silent and large, it was a large-shaped object, it drew my attention even further. I might have just ignored it. It was oval, and it had three sets of lights underneath it.
And it just kept stationary in the sky for 5-10 minutes, and then at some point, it just took off and went south in a fashion without gaining momentum, but just going straight off with accelerated speed beyond what I was used to seeing. And shortly after that, very shortly, we heard noise and then saw military aircraft following it.
The next day, sightings of this UFO were reported in the press. Nanetta was not one of the people who had called the local officials.
Now, you don't want to talk about things that people could think that you're a little strange thinking about it. I was in denial about it because I didn't want to accept or believe that this thing was, did not have a rational reason behind it.
2 years later, in the same area of New Jersey, disc jockey Dave D'Elia claims he witnessed an unidentified flying object on St. Patrick's Day in 1988 over North Hudson Park. D'Elia says he was driving home when he noticed something in the sky. He pulled over.
As I'm standing there, it's getting closer and closer, no noise at all, but the lights that made up the triangle were white, the diamond were white and green.
D'Elia returned to his car and followed the UFO down the parkway for several miles, noting the shape of the craft.
The shape of the UFO was a diamond shape like this. Where my thumbs are was basically the part that was coming toward me. That's how it was flying.
In 1993, 5 years after D'Elia's reported 1988 sighting, another North Bergen resident, Ann Karlovich, who had been skeptical of the earlier Obarski sighting, claims she too was an eyewitness to an unidentified flying object.
I saw this very kind of a elliptical shaped large light shining, and I looked at it and I said, gee, wow, what is that? And it seemed to be moving very slowly, but I wasn't sure. And then as I turned my car around, it was gone. So I came into the house, and my son-in-law and daughter were here. And I said to Joe, my son-in-law, I said, wow, did I see something strange on Boulevard East? And he said, I saw it too.
It had a sort of eerie glow. It looked metallic and was very well lit, like with a fluorescent, bright flood kind of light. As I recall it to be a blimp-like object, like an elongate, like an ellipse, you know, elliptical sphere, if you will.
Joe Bass remembers reading the next day in the local newspaper that all the blimps in the area had been grounded due to foggy weather.
I know what it wasn't. I know that it wasn't some sort of lights on the clouds or a meteor or anything like that. I suspect it was either some kind of government aircraft, some Air Force kind of aircraft that they don't let on that they have, an aircraft of this type. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a helicopter, it was like a blimp type object.
Since World War II, reports of UFO sightings have grown to merit a system of classification, a way to categorize people's claims. This method was developed by an astronomy professor at Northwestern University, J. Allen Hynek. It was he who coined the phrase close encounter of the third kind to describe human contact with an alien. Philip Imbrogno collaborated with Hynek on his final book in 1987. They collected accounts of East Coast sightings, which Imbrogno says number into the thousands.
As I began to investigate more cases, I began to realize that I was just touching the tip of the iceberg. Actually, in a period of 5 years, there were 7,000 sightings. Now, they were made by people who are pillars in the community. Police officers, pilots, lawyers, educators, scientists, executives for major corporations, all saw an object that they considered to be larger than a football field flying overhead.
I know what I saw. That's the only thing I can say. I know I saw something that didn't look like anything else I had seen.
Although skeptics like Professor Dolezal give compelling reasons why people think they see things which are not really there, believers remain irritated by the general skepticism they encounter. Franco Barsky is still perplexed by his father's alleged experience.
It really bothered him that people thought he was lying about this. And that's the thing that I find the most compelling about this whole story, and the thing that I have the most trouble with.
I suppose it is frightening because it's the unknown. You know, things that are not really part of the known are frightening.
It just came and went, and I could be wrong, but I think that was really a once-in-a-lifetime event where I saw something that's unexplained.
Though skeptics will insist that all the thousands of claims of alien sightings do not add up to a single scientific confirmation, people will go on reporting them, asserting with equal fervor that what they saw was real. But without physical evidence, we are left only with assumptions. Some choose to believe in the existence of extraterrestrial life, rather than tolerate the uncertainty of the unexplained.
Now you can own a video cassette of this program. Call 1-800-423-1212 and you'll receive the program you've just seen for only $19.95 plus shipping and handling.